Uber's lawsuit argues that drivers could be tipped less because of the laws. No, I reject that idea. Passengers would be more likely to tip if they knew that drivers aren't getting as much as the passengers paying. Oh, wait, hold on. All right, this actually might be a red flag. This might be the only part of the lawsuit I might side with Uber on. Yeah, I don't think Uber needs to do that. I've talked about this lawsuit before. I looked it up recently 10 months ago, and it's about Colorado. You guys know that I don't agree with all the drivers out there. There are times where drivers want something, and there have been times where I've said, you don't really want this thing, because once it's enacted, it's not going to look like how you think it is. Like Minnesota, right? People in Minnesota wanted that wage change. And since the very beginning, I was against it, right? Not because I don't want them to make more money, but because I actually believe that if they implemented a minimum wage, that it would actually hurt them more than it would help them. And that's exactly what has happened. Now, with this, it was a very simple change. I support it because it allowed us to identify some problems so that we could fix them. Colorado introduced a bill, a transparency bill, where both passengers and the drivers will be able to see how much the passenger paid, how much the drivers make, and how much Uber is taking from it. I love it. That is what I've been asking for so long, because I believe, right, that there are certain issues that drivers and Uber can team up with to fight. For example, the rising cost of insurance. If the cost of insurance is being increased because of state laws or federal requirements, we can join hands with Uber for that one battle and do something about it, right? If we're able to lower insurance costs, Uber wins, we win. Hopefully, hopefully they don't keep taking that money from us, but they share that with us, right? And sometimes, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And sometimes they're not, right? I'm not saying we get into bed with Uber. I am saying that if we have that transparency, it'll allow us to know which battles are actually worth fighting. I'm going to just read from the article, and we'll talk about why Uber is suing Colorado. So this is from Westworld. It says, Uber sues to block Colorado's new rideshare pay transparency law. Uber argues that the two laws, slated to take effect in February, which is in 2 days or a day and a half, contradict the company's right to freedom of expression. All right, it says rules designed to give more transparency to rideshare drivers in Colorado are meant to kick in at the beginning of February, but Uber has filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court seeking to declare them unconstitutional. Under two new state laws, Senate Bill 24075 and House Bill 241129, gig driving companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash must disclose to drivers and passengers on a single screen the total amount a rider paid before the tip, the amount that went to the driver, and the amount of the tip after a driver completes a given trip. I like it. I didn't even realize it was doing all of that, but it's important for the passenger to be able to see how much they tipped and how much of the tip the driver got, and to display it, because, and I'm not making this up, Uber has been found to be stealing tips, to be shaving tips. There's articles out there that you can see. Let me co-sign it real quick. Uber lawsuit stolen tips. It says, according to the order approving settlement, not only will Uber have to pay over $300,000 to the users that were tricked into believing the gratuities were solely for the drivers, but Uber will also have to pay for the class action attorney's fees separately. So it's been declared, found legally, that Uber was illegally taking people's tips. So I'm not making things up here. The laws also require that when a driver is offered a trip, rideshare apps must disclose the total distance and time a trip is expected to cover. We have that in certain areas, but there's no law forcing this except this, right? Except this one. And I think this is okay. And I have no issues with this, and I don't see what the problem is, right? Let me say this, right? I'm not so oblivious to the fact that Uber needs to make money, drivers need to make money, and passengers need to save money, right? I'm not oblivious to those three things. And when it comes to certain parameters within those three, they're going to tug against each other, right? So I'm not stupid to that. I know that Uber needs to make money, and I know that drivers need to make money. There is no part of this bill that is directly affecting that, right? There's Uber doesn't lose anything. Well, they lose something, right? They don't lose financially by telling the independent contractor that they're working with how long a ride is going to be. That information should be there, right? So I'm okay with this. No complaints here. It says on January 11th, Uber filed a lawsuit against Scott Moss, director of the Colorado Division of Labor and Employment, and Jared Polis, governor of Colorado, charging that those laws passed last May by the Colorado legislature are illegal and should be overturned. This is crazy, right? Uber is trying to prevent a bill that was passed last May. It's a long time ago. And they're waiting a few days before it's supposed to be enacted to stop it. Maybe this has something to do with the new administration. Maybe they're expecting some help from them, right? That could be real, but it feels slimy. It feels real slimy. Okay, so apparently Colorado state legislature cannot be sued. So it says lawsuit, right? Am I making things up here? Uber sues to block Colorado. Yeah, they sued to block it, but they're saying that it can't be sued. I don't quite know what that means. Maybe because, I don't know, let's keep reading and find out. It says Uber lawsuit claims that the regulations unconstitutionally compel Uber to speak in a way that contradicts the company's right to freedom of expression. This is insane. First of all, I want to talk about the broader idea that companies are protected under, what is it, the First Amendment, right? I don't want to misspeak here. I'm also not going to pretend like I know all the amendments. So First Amendment. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects freedom of speech. So I was right. I don't think corporations should fall under this. I think this is for people, and corporations are people, right? And I know that they use this to protect corporations being able to give money to politicians, right? As a form of free speech. I think that should go away too. But that's deeper into politics, not really rideshare related. I don't think that Uber, like if Uber wants to sue because they feel like they shouldn't have to do this, fine. If you're going to say it's against your constitutional right of freedom of expression, as a corporation, you shouldn't have any of that. Like, I don't, that's not the merit in which I think that this case should be had, right? If Uber's argument is we're being forced to share information that other people don't have to share, fine, do that. Talk about that. Don't come here and use the thing that is like sacred to America as a like protection that shouldn't even qualify for you. And it might, right? They can use this and maybe they'll win. Maybe they won't. Hopefully they don't, right? I'm just not a fan of it. So to continue, it says, even under the most generous reading, they do not further any legitimate state interests. The lawsuit says of the two new laws, where novel regulation infringes upon the First Amendment's right of free speech, and the government cannot meet its burden under the law to justify such infringement, as is the case here, then the law must give way to Uber's constitutional rights. Ugh, so slimy. So slimy. Uber is asking a district court judge to temporarily prevent the laws from going into effect and to declare both the state laws federally unconstitutional. Can a district court judge say that it's federally unconstitutional? They're trying to make it so that no one implements this anywhere, not just Colorado. It says both laws were passed after years of advocacy from gig drivers, led by Colorado Independent Drivers United, a union of rideshare workers vying for better conditions in Colorado. Gig drivers successfully pushed for transparency on driver pay, trip distance, and driver deactivations, all of which are part of the new laws. Uber's lawsuit does not mention the driver deactivation portion, but focuses on upcoming regulations requiring trip distance and driver pay disclosures to customers and riders. So part of the new law is that there are better protections for driver deactivation, which Uber has been improving. And I'm not going to give them credit because they were forced to improve it through a lawsuit from New York, right? So, and they just applied it nationwide, which is cool. So I guess they're not as concerned about that part of it. And this law went into effect before that change. So it makes sense why they're not really focused on that part because they're already doing that part. The two laws were very similar, but they are split between transportation network companies, which move people, and delivery network companies, which move items or food, right? So that's why they're two different bills. The lawsuit is a blatant attempt by Uber to dodge accountability and continue exploiting both its drivers and its customers. Anthony Sorozo, president of Communications Workers of America Local 7777, the union overseeing CIDU, says in a statement. Colorado passed these laws after months of negotiation and compromise, and Uber's last-minute legal maneuvering is a slap in the face to the democratic process. I had the pleasure of listening to Rideshare Rodeo. He's based in Colorado. He's been very involved with this bill. He came out with a podcast episode 3 days ago. It was fantastic. He actually spoke with one of the ladies who like authored the bill, I guess, right? And I learned a lot from it. And she noted that they didn't just put this bill out without Uber knowing about it. There was constant back and forth between the two over what's okay, what's not okay, right? This bill was even shot down at first. And they came back to the table and worked on it. So months later, almost a year later, we have Uber suddenly disagreeing with it. Like something's up, right? Either they feel confident that they can get this overturned by appealing it to a higher level, and they were just biding their time to see who the president might be, or they actually believe like this is going to do something, right? And I'm just not sure. But make sure you check this out, right? He brings on several different people, where you see Mike drops in here, some guy who I don't know, Rideshare Professor. He even brings on Sergio, right? So go check that. Like, it's his YouTube channel is called Rideshare Rodeo. Check out that podcast. It's pretty good. But let's jump back into what this news article is saying. So it says drivers say that rideshare companies have taken a higher percentage of the fares paid by riders over the years. When the Cross-Institutional Workers Algorithm Observatory examined data from 13,000 gig drivers in Colorado, the academic organization found that only 14% of what customers pay go to drivers. That sounds real low, real low. I'd want to see their study. I don't think it's that bad. And if it is actually that bad, either customers are getting ripped off or drivers are truly not making any money. So like something is off here. And like when people who don't do rideshare do studies about rideshare, they overlook things. But 14% is real low. The observatory also discovered that base pay for Colorado drivers decreased from about $1.50 per mile in 2019 to around 50 cents per mile in 2024. That's a huge difference, right? This sounds about right. $1.50, 2019. That sounds about right. To drop to 50 cents per mile, I hope that's not the case. For their sake, right? For the driver's sake, I hope people in Colorado aren't making 50 cents a mile. If you are, it's time to quit. It's time to find something else. This is not sustainable if that's what you're making per mile. Uber says the company is trying to increase transparency on earnings, service fees, and other operational costs, but argues that ham-fisted regulations on speech are not conducive to that goal. See, that's the shady part, right? I agree that Uber has made strides to be more transparent, but I also believe that they're being transparent in a way that benefits them, right? They're showing us how much is going to insurance because they want us to fight insurance. But if they have to show everything, including to the passengers, it's different. Showing drivers how much passengers paid is one thing, right? If you want to upset your driver base, you're not worried because you churn and burn. You'll get other drivers. Now with passengers, if passengers feel like you're cheating them, it can make a passenger go say, hey, I see that I paid $30 for this ride. And I see that you're only getting $10 for this ride. Why don't I just give you that money and stop using Uber as a middleman, right? And who's to say that that's how it goes? But I think that's what Uber is worried about. They're worried about customer backlash from seeing how much of their money isn't going to the drivers. And that puts drivers in a position to better negotiate or to better complain to Uber about the pay discrepancy, right? In a way that's beneficial to them. So earlier, before we started talking about this, I said, I think there is a natural push and pull between how much people make and how much people want to pay them, right? Between Uber, the customer, and the driver. And I think that this transparency bill puts everything out on the table, right? So that all sides can actually see what's happening and push and pull accordingly. And I support this, right? I support this transparency, right? I don't think that it should be protected. I hope that whichever judge is overseeing this case does not side with Uber, because I want to see. I want that information to look at. I want that information to come to my own conclusions. And I want other people to have that information to come to their own conclusions too. So continue saying, we warned the legislature that the bill would have unintended consequences and have filed this lawsuit as the last resort. Uber said in a statement through spokesperson Stephanie Sass. Not only would this law lead to more unsafe and distracted driving, it would increase confusion, reinforcing inaccurate perceptions about how much of the fare Uber actually takes. All right. that I'm getting worked up. I'm getting worked up here. I'm going to reread it. Not only would this law lead to more unsafe and distracted driving, right? Let's stop there for a second, because these two different statements are getting me so heated for different reasons. I can't do both at once. So the first one, not only would this law lead to more unsafe and distracted driving, where is the distraction coming from? Is Uber out of their minds? Like, do they think that I'm going to be in my car? Like, hold on. I can't even comprehend a situation in which a driver will be distracted, because this is such a reach. It's such a reach. Like, what's the expectation here? That in the middle of a ride or after I drop a passenger off, I'm going to start driving while looking at how much like I paid? Like, you know what? Right now, if you want to see how much a passenger paid, to the best of my knowledge, I think you have to go online. I don't think you can do it in the app, which that to me is a problem, right? So they're kind of obscuring it, hiding it. And I think they're trying to say that they want to protect that model. And their reason for that is like, so that drivers aren't looking at it while they're driving. Like, come on. There is so much that the Uber app does right now to distract drivers. Right? What is that feature called? Where when you're driving with a passenger in your car, it's just showing you other rides. Like, you know how annoying and distracting that is? I don't know what street I need to make a right turn on, because at the moment I need to make that turn, you're showing me like the trip radar for the next ride. If you don't think that's distracting, but you think this would be distracting, it really shows that Uber doesn't have much ground to stand on. Like they're pulling things literally out of their tailpipe, trying real hard not to curse. They're pulling things out of their tailpipe. And I'm proud of myself because I made a car analogy on the spot. So that's the first issue, right? The second issue, they say reinforcing inaccurate perceptions about how much of the fare Uber actually takes. Listen, what is inaccurate, right? If you have to tell people how much Uber actually takes, right? Uber takes this, percentage of that goes to insurance, percentage of that goes to driver. Why would that be inaccurate? How would telling the truth cause inaccurate perceptions, right? That doesn't make any sense. If you're worried about the truth being inaccurate, then find a way to explain it in a way that is accurate. The problem here is it seems like Uber's been lying for so long. They don't know that. Nah, they do know. This is a Hail Mary play. The more I read into this, it just feels like a Hail Mary play. Uber has tried everything. It feels like they're more afraid of being transparent than they are paying drivers more, right? We've seen Uber and Lyft bend to some of these minimum pay laws more easily than they're bending to this transparency bill, right? So I want it all out there. I don't think if you had asked me a month ago, 2 weeks ago, that Uber would try harder to hide their percentage splits than to pay drivers more, I would have never guessed that they would have tried harder to hide percentage splits. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. So it says the stated goal of Colorado's new rideshare legislation is to provide information to drivers and riders about where fares really go, but Uber alleges that the intended effect of the law is to create the perception that Uber greedily takes every dollar that doesn't go directly to the driver in profit. Okay, I can kind of understand this, right? Here's a scenario in which I understand it. On the screen, Uber is showing passengers what goes to the driver, what comes from the passenger, and what doesn't go to the driver. Right? So I can understand, right? There are fees, taxes, insurance that don't go directly to Uber that Uber has to deal with. Fine. The solution isn't to make it more obscure, right? The solution is to be even more clear. Instead of showing what goes to the driver and what goes to Uber, you show this goes to driver, this goes to the government, this goes to insurance companies, because it's mandated, this goes to Uber. That's not hard. You can't argue that being transparent is going to confuse people unless your level of transparency is meant to confuse people, right? Even if the law says all Uber has to do is show how much goes to the driver and how much goes to Uber, Uber can take it a step further to clarify what percentage of the things that Uber takes that doesn't go towards Uber's bottom line, like insurance or taxes. In fact, I think that if certain markets have high taxes, have high airport fees, it's in Uber's best interest to show that to the driver, to show that to the passenger, right? If insurance is as high as Uber is saying it is, it's in Uber's best interest to show that to the passenger, to show that to the driver, right? And do it in a way that's malicious. Be like, hey, the government is forcing us to have $1 million liability policy for these drivers. And because it's a forced law that we have to comply with, they're overcharging us compared to literally every other entity, like taxi companies that have to have this too, right? And Uber, I have to pull it up now. I have to. All right, so this is an email that was sent to one of our viewers called Diego. His name is Diego. I don't know, I said it like that. And he's in Florida. So the email reads, this is from Uber directly to him. Did you know that all 50 states, including Florida, require commercial auto liability insurance in addition to personal auto insurance for you to earn money driving on platforms like Uber? These important laws help keep everyone on the road safe, which is why Uber maintains this commercial insurance on your behalf, so you don't have to pay for your own. That's nice of you. It continues by saying, but Florida's commercial insurance coverage requirements for TNC rideshare platforms like Uber are significantly higher than those for nearly every other car on the road, including taxis, right? So I just said that. I am not making that up. This is from that email. It says, in fact, in Florida, on average, nearly 20% of the total price riders pay goes towards government mandated commercial insurance, right? 20% of what the riders pay is significantly more than 20% of what the drivers receive, right? So if I don't know what the math shakedown would be, but if I can try to walk through it mentally, if rider pays $100, then $20 of that is going to insurance. So that leaves $80 left, right? Let's say Uber's taking 50%. So that's 40 and they're giving the driver 40, if that much, right? So that $20 of insurance is 50% of $40 that the driver received. So in the case of $100, 20% of what a passenger pays is going towards insurance. That works out to a take rate from the driver of 50%, right? That's not even including the insurance. Of course, I'm pulling numbers out my butt, and the actual parameters of what it would look like would be different. But it was interesting that Uber chose to talk about how much the passenger pays instead of how much the driver received when talking to a driver, right? That's goes into how I believe there are times where when Uber is trying to be transparent, it's to cause more confusion, which is why they don't know what being truly transparent really looks like, because it causes confusion. They think it'll cause them confusion because that's how they use it, right? They use transparency as a tool to cause confusion. So when they are requested to being truly transparent, they believe that the government is using it as a tool to cause confusion for Uber. That's because Uber is a shady company. So it says at Uber, we stand for safety and feel strongly that every ride should be covered. We're committed to doing so, whatever, right? So what I do like about this email that Uber sent is that they are trying to unify drivers on a common pain point, which is forced insurance, right? And I think that's okay, right? I said it earlier. I think that this is one of those issues we should join forces with. So I'm not against that. I think that's okay. But I also, we have to be careful, right? Enemy of your enemy is your friend, but Uber is doing this for themselves. It's not for us. So, that's I just wanted to make sure you guys saw that. I don't want you guys thinking I'm making things up and talking up my tailpipe. I'm gonna coin that. If you hear anyone else say that, any of these gig tubers say that, just know it started here. I said it first. And it's okay. You guys can use it. I don't mind. It says, according to Uber, much of the money goes towards paying taxes, local fees, and insurance costs necessary for the app to operate. right? And let's say I believe it. Why do you have an issue being transparent about it? You shouldn't. The lawsuit calls out the legislation overzealous, arguing that draconian penalties for non-compliance with the legislation goes too far. Under both laws, fines of $1,000 on a per customer and per driver basis are allowed, while the TNC Act also authorizes additional $100 penalties for violating other aspects of the law. I think that's fine. It's weird. It says it's overzealous. The obvious goal of this lawsuit is to stop you from doing it. Like if you didn't think it was overzealous, then it wouldn't be an effective lawsuit. It would just be the government trying to make money off of something you're okay with paying. Instead of being transparent, you would just be okay paying a smaller dollar value than this. It says Uber takes particularly issue with the sections of the law requiring rideshare companies to prominently display the payment information in a font 1.5 size larger than any other font on the screen. I love that. The company also argues that the legislation selected metrics of rider costs and driver pay alone don't accurately portray how much Uber makes off each ride. Then make it accurate. They're not saying you can only do this. It's saying you need to be at least this transparent. But to display what Uber makes off of each ride, I read that incorrectly. But to display what Uber says is a more accurate cost breakdown will require so much information on the screen that it would be unsafe. All right, let me just make sure I display the payment information in a font. Company also argues legislation selected metrics. So the only thing I would say is unless Uber's being forced to show this after every single ride, I can understand why that might be an issue. That doesn't have to be an issue, right? It doesn't have to be an issue. But I'm also okay with not seeing this after every ride, but having the availability to see it, right? I think that passengers should be able to see it after every single ride. I think that's fine, right? They're literally not driving. If you're a driver, I personally wouldn't want to see that clutter. I'd want to know about the next ride, or even what they really should do is, that would be a problem too. But just give me a way where I can click through and see it, right? And then I'd be okay with that. So I think I actually need to go and read the bill. Not doing that tonight, but I think I need to pull up the bill and read it because some of this, there's something here that I feel like I'm missing. And it's very possible this story is being written in a way that favors drivers and passengers. And there might be something in that law that is actually ludicrous. And I'm going to look for it, right? It wouldn't be fair for me not to look for it, not because I'm trying to defend Uber, just because my intuition, my gut says that there's something at play here that it's just not making sense. And until I satisfy that feeling, I'm going to continue to feel unsatisfied and blame my ADHD. It's just like, I guess, pictures of more details. Is this an example of what they want us to show? I don't know. Example of a full service fee breakdown from Uber. This is what they submitted with the lawsuit. All right, we'll keep scrolling. It says the service fee that drivers pay Uber is not the only amount that makes up the difference between what a rider pays and a driver's earnings. All right, we just covered that. I think we can stop here. Hold on. Let me make sure. Uber's giving specific pushback. Ugh, this is so disgusting. I gotta read it. To know every item in the service fee after every ride on a single screen will lead to tiny text and way too much information for drivers who may already be hitting the road to their next destination. All right. So that sounds a little reasonable depending on like what the lawsuit actually says. The lawsuit contends, according to Uber, having to create this disclosure page would also delay deployment of the currently post-ride page that asks drivers to rate riders and vice versa, which is important for safety. Okay, this disclosure page would take about 14 seconds to load, Uber adds, compared to the rating page, which is instantaneous. According to the lawsuit, such a lag could contribute to safety incidents on the road. All right, I can agree with some of this. I can see Uber's perspective now that they've broken it down. I'm glad I didn't skip this part. It says, additionally, Uber argues that the weekly summary sent to each driver showing their earnings, various fees and taxes that make up the service fee and the total amount customers pay in 1 week is a more accurate picture of rider pay versus driver earnings than would be seen on a ride-by-ride basis. I don't agree with that, right? I don't agree with that. That's because Uber intentionally does it to where things even out over a longer period of time. But I don't think that's how it should be, right? I think it should be I think it should be both, right? I don't think this is an either or conversation. I think we should have access to that per ride and access to that weekly. And passengers for sure should have access to that. I don't like. I'm as the more I'm reading this, I'm not even sure if passengers are included in this. The government designed these disclosures to shame Uber as a driver earnings by making them appear smaller than what they are relative to Uber's revenues. The lawsuit says, on the writer side, Uber argues that passengers already get receipts that explain where their money went, so the disclosure requirements are not necessary. I want to see that for myself. I haven't taken an Uber in a really long time, so I don't even know what they show passengers. Just trying to look for an example of a receipt from Uber. Okay, so this is not adequate. I'll try to blow it up for you guys. So this is what it looks like. It shows the trip fare, $38.81. It shows what goes to the Black Car Fund, the TNC assessment fee, wait time, toll surcharge. It doesn't show anywhere what goes to the driver versus what goes to Uber. Anywhere, nowhere here does it show that. So no, I don't accept that response from Uber. So it says Uber claims unfair burdens, but drivers aren't buying it. Uber's lawsuit argues that drivers could be tipped less because of the laws as well. There's that, like sometimes I just read something and I'm not immediately able to put my finger on what it is, but I just like immediately felt very slimy. It was a very slimy thing. Uber's lawsuit argues that drivers could be tipped less because of the laws. Here's how that's translating in my head. Passengers might not tip as much. No, I reject that idea. Passengers would be more likely to tip if they knew that drivers aren't getting as much as like the passenger's paying, right? If the passenger is paying $60 to go somewhere and the passenger thinks the driver's getting $50 out of that $60, they're going to feel less inclined to tip versus if they paid $60 and the driver only got $20, right? Way more lopsided than like that's what's happening currently after like what the driver is taking a very small portion home compared to everything else, sometimes 50%, right? If the passenger knew that the driver was only getting 50%, they would feel bad for the passenger and tip more, right? If it was a scenario in which drivers were making majority of the percentage, 80%, they might not tip as much, but that's not currently what's happening. So no, I reject this point too. They're really grasping at straws. The disclosure page would be first and could take about a dozen seconds to pop up. Okay, so it says riders may not wait that long and may forget to tip or choose not to tip at all. The lawsuit suggests. Further, Uber would have to disable multiple tipping options, including the option to tip while on a trip, because it would be prohibited from providing any option to tip until the mandated information is available, and it is not until the trip is complete. There are workarounds for that. That sounds like BS. They're just looking for reasons here. And people tip days after trips end. Like I'm not concerned about that. Like Uber's trying to make it seem like they're here protecting us. We want this law. Uber's trying to speak on behalf of people who want this law, right? They're saying they're trying to protect us from ourselves. You know, it's such a weird take. To meet the requirements of the law, rideshare companies would also have to tell drivers the aggregated mileage and time of each task when the task is first presented to a driver. Okay. Currently, Uber splits that information into legs, showing time until pickup and time once the passenger or food item is in the vehicle. Uber says the current screen gives drivers more information than an aggregate measure, but Colorado's new laws won't allow the extra information to be included without creating a cluttered and therefore unsafe screen. Figure it out. I'm not accepting that, right? Unless you, what Uber should have done is create fake examples with what the law is asking and show what it actually would have looked like. Like without show and tell, your arguments just aren't going to push forward as much as you think it will. Finally, the lawsuit takes issue with the new requirement that Uber estimate how much drivers may need to deduct from their income in taxes. No one cares. Oh, wait. Hold on. All right. This actually might be a red flag. This might be the only part of the lawsuit I might side with Uber on. It says, finally, the lawsuit takes issues with the new requirement that Uber estimate how much drivers may need to deduct from their income in taxes. Yeah, I don't think Uber needs to do that. Uber is not a tax advisor and does not want to run into trouble if the estimates are incorrect, as circumstances vary on a person-to-person basis. Okay, this is weird. This is the only part I'm not going to agree with. Even though we all get the standard mileage deduction, I've seen people not use it correctly. Right? Like, it's not, you're not, what is it, 65 cents, 67 cents this year? You're not losing 67 cents per mile that you drive in depreciation. It's not it. And if you are, you should do something else. Your actual expenses should be less than the deduction. And it should be, my average expense per mile is like 20 cents. It's about a fourth. And what makes being a rideshare driver profitable to those who can make it profitable is that it's a tax shelter, right? For every dollar you make, you're allowed to be exempted from paying taxes on 67% of it, right? Because the government's assuming that that's your expense ratio. But that expense ratio also considers like trucks, construction trucks, like expensive trucks. And then it gets applied broadly across all Americans. I personally drive one of the cheapest cars to operate. It's a Prius. And because in my market, I believe using the cheapest thing possible to make the most amount of money is going to give me the biggest tax haven. That's why I do it, right? And every year I put out a video showing my taxes. I show you guys how much miles I drove, how much money I actually made and took home, how much money I actually spent on expenses. And then I compare it to what the tax deduction thinks I should have made. And so, I'm not talking from my tailpipe. I have videos out there where I show what I know what I'm talking about. I do not think Uber should be required to estimate taxes for independent contractors. I think that as an independent contractor, there are some burdens that you just have to learn, deal with yourself. You need to be okay with tracking your own business, right? In fact, I made my own spreadsheet. I'll show it to you real quick. I made my own spreadsheet that helps me track my own business. This would be similar to where if you're an independent contractor and you work for a construction site, that the construction site should have to tell you what your taxes might be. No one does that. And if they do it, it's great, right? But like they shouldn't be forced to do that, right? So this is my spreadsheet tracker. It's not up to date. I didn't put all of my income in here for January yet, but I always track my mileage. I'm starting to track my door-to-door time. I track all of my expenses. I haven't finished putting in my income. So the only thing that's missing from here is the income. That's because I can always go through the Lyft app and do it. But whenever I go and buy gas, I put it in here like immediately, right? So I know what my expenses are. And my mileage is up to date. Every time I drive and stop driving, I update my mileage based off of my odometer readings. And if you want access to this, you can become a member and you'll get access to this. I'm working on releasing the 2025 version, but I know so far this year, and I haven't put in like my insurance and things like that, but my biggest expense is going to be gas. I don't have a car payment because my car is paid off. And just for gas, right? Nothing else. I haven't put car wash. I haven't put insurance. Just gas is 8 cents per mile. 8 cents per mile. And that's personal and business, right? Because I separate my personal. I drove 649 personal mileage. And then my business mileage is 1,463. And the mileage write-off is 67 cents, right? I even have it here to where it shows you what your estimated taxes are based off of the mileage deduction, right? Of course, all of my income isn't even in here yet, but it shows my estimated taxes for the income that I have put in there is $144. And it shows my true hourly rate after all that like consideration. I don't think everyone's tax situation is going to be so different that I actually agree that showing estimated taxes on a broad spectrum is going to be confusing. And it does open Uber up to be liable for information otherwise. I think 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3 I disagree with, and then 2 out of 3 I do agree with. But this does show me that I need to actually pull up the bill myself and go through it. I'll probably do that next stream next week because that is a little unreasonable. We all want this. I want it.